Alrighty, welcome back to a new video. In this video, we're going to be finally going over some of the economic concepts that I've always wanted to go over, and essentially just paint a path of progression from the early league to the mid league and then essentially to the end league. And that isn't necessarily like, going from month 1 to month 3. It's more just kind of a progression path you can follow in terms of ramping up, like earning currency, etc. Because sometimes I think it can be hard for people to ramp up to a high currency strategy because it's like you need to get started on, easier strategies that don't require like necessarily as much investment or need to be a little bit simpler, right? Because sometimes doing those really high income strategies can be risky in a sense if you have to invest resources and maps, etc. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of breaking this up into like 3 parts. I think that'll be the best. We'll see how that goes. And basically we're going to start out with the basics, at least in terms of what I do at the start of a league for some currency, and then work way into the mid, and then again the late game. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be essentially talking about 3 tabs, and I've kind of made a little section here and cut off here, and these are the 3 green tabs. You'll notice that I've scrolled through a ton of tabs and that I have a ton of tabs. I generally don't use most of these tabs. I use a good amount of them up top, but overall you don't need like a bajillion tabs. In terms of having tabs, obviously you can stick more stuff in them to sell, but for me there comes a point of micromanaging where it's like, too much is too much. So that's why we're going to be sticking with 3 tabs essentially, because that's all we really need to show off essentially like the general concepts and fundamentals of what we're going to be doing early league anyways. So without further ado, let's get started. So when we get into early league, I generally don't trade or do any of that stuff pre-maps. If there's something I'm really looking for, an example is like a unique item that I really want, I know that's I'm going to be using for a long time, I'll spend a chaos on it, something like that, or like an alchemy orb, as that's definitely possible to find those through the axe. However, for the most part, most of my trading doesn't happen until I actually get to maps. So when we get to maps, what's going to happen? Well, let's kind of get into it. So as we have these 3 empty tabs here, we have nothing in them. So what do we fill them with? Well, some people like to fill them with act gear, right? Like coming to the end of the axe, etc., right? They'll find some like level, like 60 bases or something like that. Which again, like let's say you're like in act 9, like we can kind of see what level these are. And this isn't necessarily you buying them from a vendor. I'm talking like if you literally found them off the ground, right? And they had some decent rolls. Some people like to do this. We're looking at what is this item level like 68, 69, right? 67, somewhere in there, right? And you might find one of these like with really good rolls on the ground, etc., or your old gear that you're upgrading from, and you essentially want to sell it, right? So some people really like doing that. I don't personally like doing that just because things can clog up really fast because you're kind of like, okay, what do I pick up, what do I don't pick up? The tabs get really filled up. And again, what we're trying to do is use these 3. And if we're using these 3 again with all the big gear, that's going to clog it up, not too great. So we're going to wait till maps, we're going to pop into maps. I'm using a tier 2 just as an example because I don't have that many tier 1 maps left. But tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, essentially what I love to do here is pick up rares. And we're going to kind of show what happens here. So if we jump into dunes here, essentially as we're kind of mapping going along, again, this can be for tier 1, tier 2, and as you can see, I've just like transmuted the map is something I'll do. I'm trying to get my bonus, right, on my Atlas objectives here. I'm trying to get this up, and I'm not necessarily alking anything. And again, so you'll be starting down here and then working your way up, right? And so nothing too complicated in terms of like difficulty. What I'm looking for is rare bases. If we go ahead and hold Alt here, this is the stuff I'm actually looking for. Like usually I'll have a loot filter on, I'll keep that on just to ignore a lot of this white and blue stuff, and I generally don't like to tinker with loot filters too much. I did for the first time this league, but it's not something that you need to do by any means. But basically what I'm looking for as I'm holding Alt here is I'm looking for rares, because rares are already rolled. I don't have to spend a chaos war on them myself, etc. And they're going to have, the most amount of stats on them, which potentially someone could use. So like an example here, like this claw, this is perfect. I'm going to grab this quiver as well. I think that's totally fine. I'm not going to grab chest pieces and such, just because they generally fill up stuff. What I'm mainly looking for is jewelry, okay, or some one-handed weapons, especially like claws, etc. Got a chaos there, and you can see here I'm holding Alt the entire time. You don't have to do this, and I do not do this, by the way. So if you're thinking, oh my god, I gotta hold Alt, or I gotta turn off my loot filter, right? If anything, the gameplay looks more like this, where you're kind of tapping, and especially if you're running like a low-level loot filter, it'll get rid of the garbage for the most part, right, in terms of like the whites and blues, but it'll leave in some rares, which is really nice. So even some things like some trapper myths you could potentially pick up. And the key is that when you pick up this stuff, like I'm describing like a one-handed sword, for example, is you really want to stock up and use your wisdom scrolls. So it's kind of a mixture of where, like, if you find some wisdom scrolls, that's fantastic, make sure to pick them up. But also too, you're going to be running through them really quick because you're going to be IDing a lot of items. Like there's wisdom scrolls right there. That's awesome. And we're going to be working our way along here, and let's go ahead and see what we got, even from just this part of the map. I'm being not stingy at all here. As you can see, I picked up a lot of stuff, and we're going to go out and ID some stuff, okay? And that's just me essentially just right-clicking, holding shift, and I'm left-clicking. That's just a very standard thing I do, just go boom, 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 get it all the way. And basically what I'm looking for is just a couple good stats. So something like this, I might go, okay, it's got some life, it's got some crit multi or something like that. Maybe that's like goes up for a chaos, right? Maybe. I look at this and I go, okay, nothing really matches here now. And I kind of scan through really quickly. I'm not very particular. Like, I'm not really looking at it like, I wonder if, like, because there's going to be so many mods spawning on items, right? Because so many items are coming out. So it's more just kind of look at it, do a couple stats, okay, that can maybe go for a chaos. Look in here, couple item stats, these are okay, maybe that goes for a chaos, right? This isn't linked, or it doesn't have many jewel sockets in it, I don't think I need that, And you can kind of sort through and see what you want. The reason why I pick up a claw, for instance, is because especially weapons early on, people are looking for weapons because there's nothing crafted, right? You can't craft anything because the stuff to craft the weapons doesn't exist yet, right? So because we're coming in the league so early, any of this stuff could be potentially really solid, or at least for the chaos or two, right? And how do you know? Again, it's just finding a couple mods. So even something like this might be a chaos, right? If you want something like, like this, well, it's got a little bit of crit, a little bit of lightning damage, maybe just not good enough, but what's most important is essentially your IDing items and looking through them, which sounds really tedious, but you don't have to be super on the ball. Example is like, let's say I'm not pushing alt here, not a big deal. We can move on from here. Again, I'm not tapping it the entire time. I was just kind of showing that beginning. I'm just kind of working my way through. And again, if you have like a normal loot filter, then what'll happen is, you'll get some jewelry pop-ups, which are really nice. So an example here, maybe I can even show this. Let's see if I have one. I was looking at some spine bows. Let's go to normal. There it goes. Perfect. This is exactly what I want to see. I should have switched this earlier. So as you can see, we have stuff like a lapis amulet, right? This is an instant click. You see any jewelry, okay, this is an instantaneous click. If you see things like claws, perhaps, right? You're looking for like life on hit claws, things like that, right? You're looking for like spell damage, like opal wands, right? And I know I'm kind of saying stuff like, oh, like what kind of claws should you look for, etc. You're looking for the best bases. If you really want to go into it, you can go to like Craft of Exile or the POE wiki and scroll down to find like the higher level bases, right? But let's say for all intents and purposes, again, we do pick this up, right? Because I would rather have you be non-discriminate in that regard for items and just pick them up and get going. Because although you're like, oh, this isn't necessarily the best base, let's say this rolls something decent, like this did not roll great, but let's say if it did roll something decent, then who cares? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be doing a decent amount of damage and it's potentially sellable. The market moves really quick. There's a lot of people buying and selling items. So even just a chaos or two is really important. So then we clear out the rest of the map, whatever. Again, doesn't have to be 100% cleared. Here's like chromatic, or here, this could be awesome here. And actually, I'm so glad I dropped this because I can kind of show this off too. And we showed a linked item here, regardless of whether or not it's a chrome. So if we take a look at our loot from this map, let's kind of ID this stuff here. Let's grab another wisdom scroll. Awesome. Is that we will have this wand, it's not that great. Doesn't really do too much here. We're going to check that out. Let's take a look at this claw. Claw's okay. Might sell this for a C. And then we have this item. Now, this item's blue. What happens if it was white? Okay, and what I generally like to do with white is if I'm farming essences or doing essences, take a low-level essence, okay, like a Screaming Essence of Greed, something like that, like a Resistance Essence, something like that, hit it once and then put it up. My big thing for that is what that does, and you get, again, I generally put this up for a little bit more for then like the essence cost. So example, let's say the essence is half a C or a C, then I put the item up for 2 or 3 C, right? And what essentially that does is it allows you to slightly make some more money, right? And on top of that as well, it gets you kind of in a learning mindset of like what items can sell and can't, because you might slam an essence on this, right? Like for instance, it's a blue item, and for something like this, because it's blue, by the way, I'd sell it to a vendor. But let's say it's not, say it's a white item, scour this, you find it like this, drop into your essence tab, slam one on, and you go, okay, cool. I'm gonna come down here, and let's say I put it up, make this public here. Each item individually priced, and I go, okay, I think this is worth 2C, right? And all of a sudden you might get spam ping for it or something like that, and you go, whoa, what's going on here, right? And you might realize, oh, this is like 5C or something like that, at 3, 4, 5C, right? And maybe you sell it off for 2 anyways, but that's okay, you learned. You went like, okay, that's actually like pretty decent there. You know, that's something to keep in mind. Something like jewelry, because it takes up so little space, you know, we definitely want to be filling our tabs up with this, you know, let's just pop this up, maybe like 2C, something like that. And again, in early league, I know this isn't great because you're like, oh man, I'm not making like a ton, I'm only making a couple C per trade, is that trade should be happening often. And you want your tabs filled. That's generally my big thing that I do because it gives more chances for people to look at your items, right? It's kind of like, you know, just owning like a big storage warehouse kind of thing. Like think of it like an Amazon, right? It's like, you know, the fact that they have an online platform, can show off all their different products is huge, right? And it's a similar thing here where you want to show off as many of your products as possible, right? You don't want to bank everything necessarily on one item, especially in the early league. It's just like, hey, get the quantity out, get items cooking. So something like this is really, really important, where you're putting them up for 1, 2, 3, maybe 5C max. But again, people don't have much money, and neither do you, obviously, so you're trying to get as much as you can. What this enables you to do is that, let's say you start getting these sales, 1, 2 chaos, 1, 2 chaos, etc., is you start exchanging those chaos for gear exactly tuned for your build. Because, think of it, large quantity, right? So there's a good amount of competition. So, large quantity of items here means as well that there's going to be a lot to pick from your own gear. So if you're like, I need this ring to have life, I need to have energy shield, an example, like if you were searching it, I need to have strength and cast speed or something like that, I need this to be like a 3 to 4 prop ring, then you might actually find something like that on League Star for like a chaos or 2. Right? And so, because again, people can't charge a ton too, because other people are thinking, hey, other people don't have much money as well, right? So it's an interesting kind of like dynamic where like you're not selling things for much, but you're also buying things for extremely cheap. And that allows you to get some really solid, punchy gear, right? That's going to allow you to extend out into the end game because, again, you're just making a few solid upgrades, and that makes white maps a breeze, allows you to cruise into yellow tier maps, right? And then I generally do an upgrade session again once I'm kind of going into red maps, right? And then you can go from there. Not set in stone, but just something important to think about. Okay, so the big thing here essentially is getting items in here as fast as possible. Now, what happens when you start to fill up, right? Because what happens if you get a full, set of items in here, right? And you're like, oh my god, like what's going on? I can't keep track of everything in here, or this hasn't sold, whatever. That's okay. What I would generally do at that point is basically go in there, sell everything, vendor everything, okay? Start fresh, start anew. So let's say this is all filled up, everything's in, you're going, man, all this stuff on the left isn't selling. Let's say again, there were more items here, you go, oh, this stuff isn't selling, but this maybe like there's like a spot or 2 on the right that's selling, etc. But most of it isn't. Okay, that's fine. I click all this stuff out, jump over to the vendor, done, sell it, right? It's still some decent currency here early game, because again, people don't have this like crafting materials, etc. Done, no problem, keep it moving. The important thing is that you're cycling items, okay, whether you're selling them or to a vendor or to a person, because that's extremely important. Again, keeps the currency flowing, and you're actually going to see results of money coming in rather than just going into a map like Dunes, right, and having like 1 Chaos Orb drop or none, right? Because you could say I got lucky this map like with 1 dropping necessarily, right? So something to keep in mind, right? And that's the thing for me, is I love to see the sales because you're actually getting Chaos Orbs, okay? So that's my big thing for the early game. Work through with that jewelry, okay? Especially because it's going to take up the least amount of space. This means your rings, this means your amulet, your belt. Stick that in there, fill it on up, right? Because people are really, really going to want that stuff. Be careful about stuff like bigger items like bows and chest pieces, things like that. You can absolutely do that. Just be wary of it, okay? But jewelry is your main stick, okay? Or one-handed weapons like claws. Loving claws. Sometimes people will go for swords, but generally claws, jewelry, you are cooking. So that is what I would recommend. So that's going to be part 1, but then part 2 we're going to be kind of amping this up and trying to get essentially just some more, more currency influx going. So hopefully that helps some people, and yeah, part 2 will be coming out soon.